Hello, welcome to the Encounter of Fear channel. My name is Arlindo Chagas. If you like horror stories, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Today, we have a story that will leave you with chills. It was a moonless night, and Joachim, an experienced fisherman, was out on his boat far from the coast. The waters were strangely calm, and the silence was eerie. Joachim, used to the sound of waves and wind, began to feel a chill down his spine. He couldn't explain it, but something felt wrong. Suddenly, he noticed a shadow in the depths of the sea, something large and sinuous that seemed to be following him. Thinking it was just a large manta ray or some unusual fish, he tried to ignore it, focusing on his fishing. But the feeling of being watched didn't go away. Looking around, everything seemed normal, but he couldn't shake off that unease. As he pulled in his net, the shadow started moving strangely, almost as if it were dancing under the water, mirroring Joachim's movements. He began to sweat, his heart pounding. Trying to calm himself, he whispered a prayer, but the shadow remained, getting closer. Finally, the shadow began to emerge slowly, revealing a grotesque shape. The water around the boat started to bubble, and a nauseating smell filled the air. Joachim felt his stomach churn. When the creature finally surfaced, he couldn't believe his eyes. It was a monstrosity with tentacles, glowing red eyes, and a mouth full of sharp teeth that twisted into a sinister grin. The boat began to rock violently, and Joachim felt an icy chill down his spine. Without warning, the creature attacked, its tentacles wrapping around the boat, pulling it down. Joachim screamed for help, but his voice was quickly swallowed by the sea. He tried to fight back, cutting at the tentacles with his fishing knife, but it was futile. The creature was too strong. As the boat sank, Joachim saw flashes of his life passing before his eyes. He thought of his wife and children waiting for him at home. Desperation took over, and he screamed with all his might, but all he heard was the sound of the sea and the creature's whispers. Suddenly, everything went dark. Joachim awoke in a strange place, surrounded by deep darkness. He was trapped in some sort of underwater cave, with the creature watching him closely. Every move he made, the creature's red eyes glowed more intensely. He was alone, with no way out, and fear consumed him. Days passed, and Joachim realized he wasn't alone in the cave. Other victims of the creature were there, their bodies mutilated and souls trapped in that eternal nightmare. They whispered to him, telling their stories of horror and suffering. Joachim felt his sanity slipping away, closer and closer to madness. In one last desperate attempt, he decided to confront the creature. Using what little strength and courage he had left, he attacked with his knife. The creature roared, its tentacles flailing to defend itself. Joachim fought with all his might, but the creature was relentless. In his final moment, he felt the tentacles tighten around his body, crushing his bones. The next morning, only debris from the boat was found. Joachim was never seen again, and local fishermen still claim to hear his screams echoing on moonless nights. Some swear that in the depths of the sea, the shadow of the creature still lurks, waiting for its next victim. If you are out at sea on a moonless night, be careful. You might be the next to encounter the shadow. Get ready for another chilling tale. Pedro was a young fisherman who often went out to sea with his father, a wise and experienced man who had sailed those waters for decades. On a night of dense fog, when the sea seemed more like a nightmare painting than a real place, they spotted an old ship, apparently adrift. Its sails were torn and the hull was covered in algae and moss. as if it had been at the bottom of the sea for years. Curious, they decided to approach and investigate. As they drew nearer, a sense of unease washed over Pedro. He could feel something was wrong, a cold that seemed to penetrate his bones. The ship appeared abandoned, but there was a strange sensation of being watched. Pedro suggested they turn back, but his father, driven by curiosity, insisted on boarding the ship. Once aboard, they noticed everything was intact, as if the crew had vanished suddenly, leaving behind plates with leftover food, half-filled cups, and personal items scattered about. Pedro found a logbook in one of the cabins. The pages were yellowed and the letters faded, but one thing was clear. The log spoke of a curse that haunted the ship and its crew. As Pedro read aloud, the fog around them began to thicken, and a strange darkness fell over the ship. Doors started to slam, and whispers echoed through the corridors, as if tormented souls were trying to communicate with them. They ran back to their boat, but looking back, they saw shadows moving within the ship. Just as they were about to leave, the ghost ship began to move on its own, pursuing them. The tattered sails filled as if a supernatural wind drove them, and the ship gained speed. Pedro and his father rowed with all their might, but with each stroke, the ship seemed to get closer, its eerie lights flickering in the fog. Suddenly, a ghostly hand emerged from the water and grabbed their boat, pulling it back towards the ghost ship. Pedro tried to cut it with a fishing knife, but it was like slicing through smoke. His strikes had no effect. His father began to pray, asking for divine protection, while Pedro fought against the growing despair. When all seemed lost, a bright light appeared on the horizon. It was another boat, searching for them after noticing they were taking too long to return. The presence of the other boat seemed to break the spell, and the ghostly hand released their boat, allowing them to row safely away from the ghost ship. The cursed vessel then vanished into the fog, as if it had never been there. Back on land, Pedro and his father told their story, but few believed them. Some said they were tired and hallucinating. Others thought it was just a fisherman's tale. However, the two of them knew the truth. Pedro still had the logbook as evidence, but even so, he decided never to open those pages again. Years later, Pedro still had nightmares about the empty eyes of the ghost crew staring at him from the cursed ship. He never went back to sea at night, fearing the ghost ship was waiting to complete its curse. He spent the rest of his days warning other fishermen about the dangers of fog and the night sea, hoping no one else would have to face that terror, and beware of what lurks in the depths of the mist. Today, I'm going to share a story that happened to a fisherman named Marcos, and I promise it will keep you up all night. Marcos was a simple man living in a fishing village on the coast of Brazil. He knew those waters like the back of his hand, having learned to fish from his father and grandfather. But one night something happened that would change his life forever. It was a full moon night, and the sea was calm. Marcos decided to go out alone to fish, something he occasionally did to find a bit of peace and solitude. He rowed far from the shore until the village disappeared on the horizon. Everything was silent, except for the gentle sound of waves lapping against the boat. Suddenly, Marcos noticed something strange in the water. It was a bright light, like a lighthouse, but there was no structure nearby that could explain it. The light seemed to pulse, almost as if it were alive. Intrigued and a little apprehensive, he decided to follow the light. As he got closer, He realized the light wasn't coming from above the water, but from below. It was as if a huge lantern was lit at the bottom of the sea. He dropped anchor and decided to wait to see what would happen. Minutes passed, and the light began to rise, becoming brighter and brighter. Suddenly the light went out, leaving Marcos in complete darkness. The silence was broken by a strange sound, a buzzing that seemed to come from all directions. He felt a chill run down his spine. Something was wrong. Before he could react, a figure emerged from the water beside the boat. It was tall and skeletal, with eyes that glowed an intense blue. Marcos was paralyzed with fear as the creature slowly approached. His heart was pounding wildly and he could barely breathe. The creature raised a hand, and Marcos felt an invisible force pulling him towards the edge of the boat. He tried to resist, grabbing the mast with all his strength, but it was useless. The force was relentless. In one last desperate effort, he shouted for help, but his voice was swallowed by the sound of the sea. Suddenly he was pulled out of the boat and dragged into the water. The cold enveloped him immediately, and he felt the increasing pressure as he was pulled deeper. He tried to swim up, but something was holding his legs. Looking down, he saw several pale skeletal hands grabbing him, pulling him deeper. Marcos fought with all his strength, but the icy water was draining his energy. He felt his vision starting to darken, and in his final moment of desperation, he thought of his wife and children, waiting for him at home. With a last burst of strength, he managed to free himself from some of the hands and swim to the surface. When he finally broke the surface, he took a deep breath, feeling the air fill his lungs. The boat was a few meters away, and he swam with all his might. When he reached the boat, he climbed aboard and looked back, expecting to see the creatures emerging from the water, but there was nothing. The sea was calm again, as if nothing had happened. Marcos wasted no time. He lifted the anchor and rowed back to shore as fast as he could. Upon reaching the village, he told his story, but few believed him. They thought he was tired and had imagined everything. But Marcos knew the truth. He had seen something that shouldn't exist, something that inhabited the depths of the sea. After that night, he never went out to fish alone again. The lights in the sea continued to appear occasionally, but Marcos always avoided them, fearing what might happen if he got too close again. He spent the rest of his days warning other fishermen about the dangers of the lights in the sea, hoping that no one else would have to face that terror. Beware of what lurks in the depths of the ocean. This chilling tale will make you think twice about exploring uncharted waters. Carlos was a seasoned fisherman, well known in his coastal village for his bravery and skill. One day, he heard rumors of an island shrouded in mystery and fear that locals referred to as the Forbidden Island. They spoke of strange occurrences and ominous tales surrounding the place, warning that no one who ventured there ever returned. Intrigued and dismissive of superstitions, Carlos decided to investigate the island. He set sail on a calm morning, the sun shining brightly. As he approached the island, an eerie fog began to form, thick and suffocating, swallowing his boat and blocking out the sunlight. The air grew colder, and Carlos anchored his boat near the shore and stepped onto the island. The silence was deafening, broken only by the occasional rustle of leaves. He walked deeper into the dense forest, feeling as if unseen eyes were watching his every move. Suddenly, he stumbled upon the remnants of an old village, long abandoned and overgrown with vegetation. The houses were crumbling, their wooden structures rotting and covered in moss. Carlos felt a chill as he noticed something strange. The ground was littered with old, decayed fishing nets and broken boats, as if the inhabitants had left in a hurry. In the center of the village stood a large stone altar, stained with what appeared to be dried blood. As he examined the altar, he heard a faint whispering growing louder and more insistent. Carlos turned around, his heart pounding, but saw nothing. The whispers seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, speaking in a language he couldn't understand. He felt a sudden urge to leave, but his curiosity pushed him to stay. The sea became unnaturally still. He ventured further, following an overgrown path that led to the heart of the island. The fog thickened and the air grew colder. Suddenly, he heard a blood-curdling scream echoing through the trees. He froze, his blood running cold. The scream was followed by a chorus of wails and cries, as if the island itself was mourning. Carlos tried to retrace his steps, but the fog had disoriented him. The path seemed to change, leading him deeper into the forest. Panic set in as he realized he was lost. The whispers grew louder, now accompanied by shadows that moved just out of sight. He felt a cold hand brush against his arm, sending a shiver down his spine. He stumbled upon an old, decrepit cabin and decided to take refuge inside. The cabin was dark and damp, with the stench of decay filling the air. As he explored, he found old journals and letters written by the island's previous inhabitants. They spoke of rituals and sacrifices to appease the island's spirits, warning of a curse that would befall those who disturbed the island's peace. Carlos's heart raced as he read the final entries, describing how the villagers were tormented by the spirits they had once worshipped. They spoke of nightmarish visions, possessions, and the gradual disappearance of their people. The last entry ended abruptly with a plea for mercy. Suddenly, the cabin door slammed shut and the temperature dropped even further. Carlos felt a presence behind him and turned to see a figure standing in the doorway. It was a woman, her face twisted in agony, her eyes hollow and filled with sorrow. She whispered his name, her voice echoing in his mind. Terrified, Carlos ran out of the cabin, blindly fleeing through the forest. The whispers and shadows followed him, relentless in their pursuit. He tripped over roots and branches, his breath ragged and his heart pounding. He finally reached the shore, but his boat was gone, swallowed by the fog. Desperate, he waded into the water, hoping to swim to safety, but the cold water sapped his strength, and he felt hands grabbing his ankles, pulling him under. He struggled, gasping for air, but it was futile. The last thing he saw was the island, shrouded in fog, as he was dragged into the depths. Days later, Carlos's boat was found adrift near the village, empty and covered in scratches, as if something had clawed at it from within. The villagers whispered of the island's curse, and no one dared to venture near it again. Remember, some places are made to remain forgotten. This terrifying story will make you think twice before venturing into the deep waters. Jorge was an experienced fisherman, known for his bravery and expertise in navigating the treacherous waters off the coast of Brazil. He had faced many dangers at sea, but nothing could prepare him for the horrors he would encounter on a fateful night. It began as a routine fishing trip. Jorge set sail before dawn, hoping to catch a large haul of fish. The sea was calm and the sky clear. As the sun rose, he felt a sense of peace and contentment. He was far from shore, in waters known for their abundance of fish, but also for their eerie reputation. As evening approached, Jorge noticed the weather changing. Dark clouds gathered on the horizon, and a chill wind began to blow. He decided to head back to shore, but as he turned his boat, he saw something strange in the distance. It was a large dark shape moving slowly through the water. At first, he thought it was a whale, but as it drew closer, he realized it was a sunken ship rising from the depths. The ship was ancient, its wooden hull covered in barnacles and seaweed. Jorge watched in disbelief as it surfaced, water pouring from its sides. The air grew cold, and an unnatural silence fell over the sea. He felt a growing sense of dread, but couldn't look away. The ship seemed to be drawn to him, moving closer with each passing moment. Suddenly the ship's bell rang, echoing across the water. Jorge's heart pounded as he saw ghostly figures moving on the deck, their eyes glowing with an eerie light. He tried to start the engine, but it wouldn't turn over. Panic set in as the ship loomed closer, its ghostly crew watching him with hollow eyes. The temperature dropped even further, and Jorge could see his breath in the air. He grabbed a flare gun and fired it into the sky, hoping to signal for help. The flare illuminated the scene, revealing the full horror of the ship. The deck was covered in bones and decaying bodies, the remnants of long-dead sailors. Jorge felt a cold hand on his shoulder and spun around to see a ghostly figure standing behind him. The figure was a woman, her face twisted in agony, her eyes hollow and filled with sorrow. She reached out to him, her touch freezing his skin. He stumbled back, falling to the deck of his boat. As he scrambled to his feet, he heard the whispers. They were faint at first, but grew louder, filling his mind with a cacophony of voices. The voices spoke of betrayal and murder, of a crew cursed to sail the seas for eternity. Jorge clutched his head, trying to block out the sound, but it was no use. The whispers were relentless. He felt the boat lurch as the ghost ship drew alongside. The ghostly crew reached out with skeletal hands, trying to pull him aboard. Jorge fought with all his strength, kicking and punching, but they were too strong. He felt himself being dragged toward the ship, the cold seeping into his bones. In a last desperate effort, he grabbed a knife and slashed at the ghostly hands. They recoiled, and he managed to break free. He stumbled to the helm and tried the engine again. This time, it roared to life. He steered the boat away from the ship, the engine straining as he pushed it to its limits. The ghost ship gave chase, its bell ringing and its ghostly crew wailing. Jorge could feel their cold presence growing closer, but he didn't look back. He focused on the horizon, praying for escape. The sea churned around him, waves crashing against the boat. Just as he thought he was doomed, a bright light appeared on the horizon. It was the lighthouse, its beam cutting through the darkness. The ghost ship hesitated, and Jorge seized the opportunity. He steered the boat toward the light, the engine screaming in protest. As he neared the shore, the ghost ship stopped. The figures on the deck watched him with hollow eyes, their wails echoing across the water. Jorge felt a moment of triumph as he reached the safety of the lighthouse's beam. The ghost ship slowly sank back into the depths, disappearing beneath the waves. Jorge reached the shore, exhausted and shaking. He told his story to the villagers, but few believed him. They thought he had been at sea too long, that the isolation had driven him mad. But Jorge knew the truth. He had seen the ghost ship, felt the cold touch of its crew, heard the whispers of the damned. He never ventured into those waters again. The memory of that night haunted him, the ghostly figures and their hollow eyes a constant presence in his mind. He spent the rest of his days warning others of the dangers of the deep, hoping that no one else would have to face the horrors he had encountered. If you enjoyed these stories and want more chilling tales, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Until next time, And remember, some horrors are better left untouched, lurking in the depths of the sea.